Hello, and welcome to the talk on indulgences. This will be the fifth talk. That is the conditions. What is required for an indulgence? Now, today we make a turn from theology to practice. We ask, what must I actually do to receive an indulgence? Now, the governing document is Enchiridion Indulgentiarum, which is also known as the Handbook of Indulgences. Forgive me if I pronounce that wrong. I'm not the best at Latin. Now, the most recent version of this document was published and revised by Pope John Paul II in 1999 under the Apostolic Penitentiary, which is responsible for indulgences. And we will work through its norms carefully, honestly, and without unnecessary complexity. So, what are the conditions for plenary indulgence? There are 5 conditions that we can speak of here. First, you perform the desired indulgence work. Second, you need to be in a state of grace. That means no unconfessed mortal sin at the time of the work. Third, you must have completed interior detachment from sin, including venial sin. In other words, you cannot have any attachments to any sin. Fourth, you have received the sacrament of confession within approximately 20 days before or after the work was performed. 5, you receive Holy Communion on the day of the work or reasonably close to it. And number 6, you pray for the Holy Father's intentions on the day of the action. Now, a note before we really begin: if any condition is not fully met, particularly complete detachment from sin, the plenary indulgence is reduced to a partial one. Now, the grace is not lost. It's proportionate to the soul's actual disposition to receive the indulgence. This is important to remember. It means every sincere effort is, in fact, fruitful by God's grace, even when it falls short of the full plenary result. So let's dig a little bit deeper here. That first condition, doing the designated work, the designated action that we are given assurance by the gift of the keys, is in fact indulgenced through. Now, not every pious act carries with it an indulgence, okay? The Church specifies which works are indulgenced and whether they carry a plenary or a partial indulgence. Now, in the 6th talk, we're going to go through specific lists within that document. The most commonly sought plenary indulgences are attached to the devout rosary being prayed in community, adoration of the Blessed Sacrament for 30 minutes or more, the Stations of the Cross, scripture reading for 30 minutes with reverence due to the Word of God, and so forth. Okay, that's just a short list. It is not the full list at all. The second condition, let's dig a little bit deeper into that. Being in a state of grace. Now, it's very direct here. To gain indulgences, one must be baptized, not excommunicated, and in a state of grace at the time of the completion of the prescribed work. If a person is in a state of unconfessed mortal sin, they cannot gain an indulgence. This is not a harsh judgment. It simply reflects the nature of what an indulgence is. Indulgences operate in the space after forgiveness and not before it. If someone has not received forgiveness, they need to seek that out first in confession. Okay? The third condition, there must be complete detachment from sin for plenary indulgences. This is the most demanding interior condition, okay? And any one that most often prevents plenary indulgences from taking place is this condition itself, okay? Now, it says in the document that it is required that the habitual disposition of complete detachment from sin, including venial sin, is required. And what does this mean in practice? Now, it does not mean achieving perfect virtue or guaranteeing you will never sin again. What it means is you have no deliberate attachment to anything of a sinful habit or pattern that you're refusing to address. You are not intentionally continuing in an occasion of serious sin that you could avoid. And also, you are not nursing a deliberate grudge or maintaining a relationship of serious dishonesty you would have no intention of resolving. So, in short, the disposition of genuine conversion, your whole will being oriented toward God and not merely being the external act performed, that's what we're getting at here, okay? The theologian Cardinal Cajetan noted that this condition explains why indulgences, even when sought frequently out by devout Catholics, are so rarely resulting in plenary remission, okay? Most souls carry some residue of being disordered, having disordered attachments to those sins. Some habitual venial sin is not being addressed by them. God receives their effort, and he grants partial indulgence proportional to their actual disposition. This is not discouraging. This is honest, and quite frankly, it's merciful. It's not like we're owed anything by God. But God in his mercy still gives us this gift by the love of him to his church. Now, let's move on. Let's talk about the confession requirement, and let's go a little bit into depth, okay? Depth. The document itself establishes that the confession requirement and its flexibility is important. There's a single sacramental confession suffices to cover multiple plenary indulgences, provided the confession occurs within approximately 20 days before or after the indulgence work. Holy Communion and the prayer for the Pope's intentions must be offered for each individual plenary indulgence which is sought after. Now, there are many frequently asked questions about this, okay? Must I go to confession even with no mortal sin? This is probably the single most common practical question about indulgences, and it deserves a thorough and honest answer. So let's be precise. The strict requirement, okay, the document does require sacramental confession as one of the conditions for a plenary indulgence. Now, there is some flexibility, okay? A confession should be done approximately 20 days within the indulgence work, and that will suffice. You do not need a separate confession for each indulgenced act. Now, does this mean you must have mortal sin to confess? No. Regular confession of venial sins is normal and recommended in a Catholic practice. Spiritually fruitful it is, really. Regardless of the indulgence itself, it's fruitful. Okay? It helps you to break away, to not be attached to those sins, to recognize where you need God and that you're approaching him, where he put himself for you to receive mercy. Now, the person without mortal sin who goes to confession monthly satisfies the confession requirement. Their regular confession falls within the 20-day window for most indulgences sought after that month. The impossible case now, okay? Let's look at an impossible case. If confession or communion is truly impossible to obtain, a plenary indulgence may still be gained if the person has contrition for their sins and a sincere intention of receiving these sacraments as soon as possible. Okay? The practical summary of it all, though, regular monthly confession is itself an excellent spiritual practice and keeps you perpetually ready to gain any plenary indulgence available during that period. Now let's hear a little bit from St. Alphonsus for his guidance here. He says, He who frequents the sacraments regularly and is free from mortal sin needs not make a special confession for every indulgence, provided his last confession falls within the allotted time. The purpose of the confession requirement is to ensure the soul is in a state of grace and disposed for grace, a purpose that is satisfied by regular sacramental practice. Now, the practical implication is thus, okay? If you go to confession monthly, which is itself recommended, you will almost always fall within the 20-day window for any indulgence that you seek during the month. This confession requirement is not a burden, it's an incentive for the regular sacramental life that is the foundation of Catholic spirituality. Let's look a little bit more. Let's dig into some spiritual wisdom behind the requirement itself, okay? Being in that disposition. Confession disposes the soul for grace in a unique way, even for venial sins, okay? The examination of conscience and the absolution itself deepens the soul's orientation towards God. Humility. Now, the requirement to go to a priest reflects an ecclesiastical character of the Christian life. We are not isolated individuals seeking grace independently. You'll often hear it said today that we are saved independently. No, we are part of a body, the church. The hand cannot say to the eye, I have no need of you. Yes, you will be judged by your actions. This is true. But we do not come to salvation on our own. Okay? Obviously, we need grace. So we need God, but we also do rely on others to bring the faith to us. Faith is not alone. It is not received apart from the communion which God established. Another is seriousness. The confession requirement signals that indulgences are not a casual devotional add-on. They are part of a serious sacramental engagement with God. Now let's look at the requirement of Holy Communion. Okay, the document specifies that communion must be received on the day of the indulgence work or with a good reason the day before or after. The connection is profoundly intentional, okay? The Eucharist is the sacrifice of Christ himself, the source from which the treasury derives its wealth. Remember when we talked about the treasury of graces, which is being used here and applied to these souls. It is by Christ's grace that we have this ability, not because of something you do on your own, but because Christ gives that ability by his life, death, and resurrection. By his choice. By him giving the church, his bride, the ability to bind and loose. That is a grace and a special love that he shares to his bride. And when you receive communion on the day you perform the indulgence work, you unite your act of satisfaction to Christ's own perfect oblation, okay? The two become a single spiritual act. Now let's look at the fourth one, prayer for the Pope's intentions. Now the requirement to pray for the Holy Father's intentions is one of the oldest intentions in the tradition of indulgences. It's not a loyalty test. It is a theological affirmation of communion with the universal church. When you seek an indulgence, you are drawing on an authority that flows through apostolic succession to the Pope. Praying for his intentions is your act of unity with that authority. Any sincere prayer for the Pope's intentions satisfies this requirement. One Our Father and Hail Mary is the traditional form. Other prayers equally valid include, the praying for the Pope's intention means universal intentions that he carries for the church and for the world, not his personal preferences or on particular matters. Now, when are the conditions not fully met? Okay. Now, the document itself, the Enchidarion, is very consoling. If a person performs the indulgence work with the right general intention, but without meeting all the conditions perfectly, they receive a partial indulgence, which is proportional to their actual disposition and circumstances. No sincere spiritual effort is ever wasted. Okay? St. Francis de Sales tells us in his work Introduction to the Devout Life, do not be over anxious about your progress in virtue. Do what you can and leave the rest to God. You will make more progress by a holy peace and joy than by all the anxieties and all the scruples that you can create. Now, the Church does not call you to achieve perfect interior purity before seeking indulgences. She calls you to genuine conversion, your whole will sincerely oriented toward God, however imperfectly. That is always enough to receive some grace, and grace builds on grace. Okay, so in summary, the conditions are not obstacles. They are elements of a spiritually healthy Catholic life. Have regular confession. That's the sacramental foundation. Frequent communion, the source and the summit of our faith. Prayer for the Church. This is an expression of ecclesiastical belonging. And genuine conversion. We are orienting our whole life toward God. In the next talk, we'll get even more practical. The specific indulgence work, extraordinary occasions, indulgences for the dead, and all remaining practical questions. Thank you.